interview an atheist at church day. I want to talk about that in just a second, but first of all, tell us about your story. Who's Kyle Jones? How did you make this journey into atheism?
Yeah, what horrible thing happened to me, right?
We'll pray for you.
Well, I'm a former youth pastor and was a Christian for about 5 or 6 years, and then as you do in ministry, you go off and go to seminary. We used to jokingly call it cemetery, but went to seminary, started studying the languages and doing the Hebrew and Greek, much of what you've done, and started deconstructing and dismantling some of the beliefs that I had once held dear, and started bringing some doubt and questions, and I slowly, over a course of a few years, deconverted and changed a lot of my beliefs. But I had these two eras of my life, right? Like the old Christian youth pastor Kyle, and then this new non-believing Kyle, and I wanted to find a way to bridge the two. So that's part of where this project came from.
Okay, talk a little about the project then. Interview an atheist at church day. How did you get started?
Yes, so I wanted to find some constructive way for atheists and Christians, or atheists and religious persons, to have a dialogue that didn't divulge into mudslinging and name-calling. And there's this typical format that you see in the public all the time, right? You get the firebrand, crazy, fundamentalist Christian. You guys are familiar with some of them outside sometimes. I was hoping they'd be here. I wanted to... they don't show up when the atheist is here? What's going on?
Right.
So, anyway, so you get that, and then you get the more firebrand, militant atheists over here, and then you set them up on stage and you have them yell at each other for a couple hours. And then everyone ends up leaving going, what just happened? It's a gladiatorial fight, right? And so I didn't like this format. I wanted to find a way for people to humanize each other, right? So I just thought, oh, hey, an interview would be a great idea. So I was friends with lots of people in ministry, lots of pastors, and so I contacted them and said, hey, would you be willing to host an atheist at your church on Sunday and just sit down and interview them? I mean, not a debate, none of that, just ask them personal questions. And what that does is it de-escalates the levels of tension, right? And it puts flesh and blood to the idea of an atheist. It also, to my atheist friends, shows that not all pastors and Christians are these whack jobs, right? So it does positive work for both sides. And so I started arranging these interviews. So I knew a pastor in wherever, New York or California, or there's been some in Canada and Australia and whatever. And atheists have reached out to me, and I've just connected them and say, here's this person, meet this person, go out and have coffee and lunch and set up an interview and record it so that we can all see it. And there's been about 40 of them so far, the last couple of years.
And they're on video on the website, so you can watch.
Yeah. On the website, there's a bunch of the videos. You can just YouTube interview an atheist at church day, and it'll pop. There's tons of videos that pop up.
Yeah. I want to talk a little about the word atheism. I have kind of a struggle with the word itself. I mean, and the distinction between atheists on one side and religious people on the other, because it's a little messy, I think. There are religious atheists, there are non-theists, post-theists. I think of Bishop John Shelby Spong. So is atheism like a strict definition of not belief in God, or is it kind of a culture?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are atheists who go, well, all that atheism really means is atheos, right, in Greek, so no God. Right? So they assume that it doesn't imply anything else. It's just a lack of a belief in God. There are other atheists who feel like it implies other things, right? It implies a strong interest in science, evidence-based reasoning, right? Naturalistic ethics. It implies this whole culture of atheism. I tend to think of it as very much muddy and murky and gray. When I first became an atheist, I was more black and white, right? No, this is just not a belief in God, and that's it. It's like, well, no, there are, kinds of trends that we follow. right? There's conferences and cliques and, even the same music that atheists like. So there is a culture to atheism, I believe, but then strictly speaking, it's just generally a lack of a belief in God.
Because one of the struggles, I think, as a church person, is that sometimes some atheists will come across as really being anti-church.
Yes.
And
most atheists are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get, tell me about that.
So I'm a what you call a soft atheist. I'm wimpy atheist. I'm more cordial. Sometimes I'm referred to as a faithist.
Atheist.
Yeah, faithist, right? An atheist that wants to actually do constructive things with religious persons.
Okay.
Now, I get slack from my more militant comrades that somehow I'm condoning this whole process, right? Like
You're making us credible.
Yeah. I'm affirming that you guys are okay, So they're going, well, what are you doing? Why are you going to churches? Why are you trying to get atheists in churches? And I told them, why not, right? I'd rather err on the side of finding those common values that we all share together, and then harnessing them. I mean, why would I want to err on the side of strife and division? I'd rather err on the other side.
Yeah.
So
good. Now, the percentage of Americans who say yes to belief in God is high.
Very high.
90% or something like that. So,
yeah.
And so those who publicly say, I don't believe in God, are a minority. In fact, distrusted minority. So what's it like to be an atheist in America?
It's easier here than in Tennessee.
Yeah.
But we actually had one of our first interviews done in Mississippi, which, as you all know, is the most religious state in the Union. The highest church attendance, highest rates of Christianity, highest everything. Also, teen pregnancy, lack of education, and poverty. Not that those correlate, but so it got so much traction. It was so popular because here's this atheist in Mississippi, right? A great guy named Neil Carter. He writes a blog called Godless in Dixie. So it's a lot more difficult in Dixie to be an atheist. Now, generally speaking, yeah, we're not very trusted. And this national survey that was done a while ago after 9/11, where they gauged national trust of different groups, and atheists ranked the bottom, like the least trusted. Below Muslims and homosexuals, and atheists are least trusted generally. And the questions that were asked were really funny, right? So to gauge levels of trust was, who do you think has your closest vision of American society, right? That was one question. The other question was, what group would you trust most to marry your child? So I always joke, if you're an atheist, be careful with the parents, all right? Walk that line.
Atheists were the least trusted.
To marry your child or
marry anyone but an atheist.
Yeah, don't marry an atheist. Yeah, and don't vote for them either.
Yeah, how many atheist candidates do we have?
None.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Bernie Sanders possibly.
But it would be doubtful that he would come out and say that.
Yes, there's probably a reason why he hasn't been. Let me talk about my secularism.
So that's another important part, and one of the reasons I wanted to invite Kyle is that we are talking about a justice issue in many respects. Is free thinking allowed in America? And in fact, when I was at East Tennessee State, working there in Johnson City, I worked with a lot of the students. Actually, in many cases, I worked with a lot of the atheist students, as well as the LGBT students, and those were the two groups of people that would always have their posters torn down or defaced or all of that kind of stuff, their meetings and whatnot, and they were the two most discriminated groups, really, of people within the whole school.
Yes. So people often talk about coming out as an atheist.
Yeah.
Right. Now,
because it affects parental relationships, right?
Absolutely.
What are you going to tell your mother?
Yeah, your family, and that happens to a lot of atheists. They get disowned, especially if they come from a really conservative family, they get disowned. And they face all insurmountable odds sometimes. Now, I don't want to compare it directly with the LGBT community because in my mind, they have had it worse. So, there hasn't been an atheist Stonewall, right? So, there are parallels, but I don't want to take away from the LGBTQ's real life persecution and hardships.
Okay.
But yeah, atheists don't have it that easy.
Yeah.
You know.
And on the other hand, I was with these surveys that are happening. The nones, those who check none on those surveys in terms of religious preference, is rising. Portland, for example, is the city that is #1 in terms of nones in the nation. We have the most unaffiliated people in regards to religion in Portland.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of that? What do you make of this trend toward more people checking none?
Yeah, I think it's been a challenging of previous generations' beliefs, right? Millennials have much more access to technology, for instance, with the internet and all of this stuff. I think that's part of it. There's been a general trend towards secularism. I think we've seen what happens when we have very fundamentalist political leaders, and we're reacting to that. Now, only a small percentage of those nones are atheists. About 12, I think it's 12 or 13%. So the nones have skyrocketed, right, in percentage, but only a small percentage of them are actually atheists. A lot of them are either don't care, they're sort of apathetic, or they're a seeker of some sort. Most of those nones still hold spiritual beliefs. They just don't want to be affiliated with one particular religion, right? So.
Yeah. Okay. So my follow-up question to that is: what are some ways in which those involved in religious practice can connect with nuns or with atheists? What have you seen happen constructively?
Sure. Well, there's all kinds of things that we can do together. I mean, other than breaking bread and sitting down and having a beer. In your case,
that's not so bad either.
No. In your case, O'Doul's, which I won't judge you on. That's right. Of course, the pastor had to have O'Doul's. Come on. But
well, there's a backstory to that one.
Yeah, it's okay. You'll show me your AA coin later. But all kinds of practical things, right? So social justice work, environmental issues. Reproductive freedoms, right? Fighting for those. So atheists generally are socially liberal. Only 1 in 10 atheists will vote Republican. So generally speaking, the majority of atheists that you meet are going to vote independent or Democrat. They're going to be socially liberal. They're going to be accepting of same-sex marriage. They're going to be accepting of things like climate change. They're not going to believe that vaccines cause autism. Right? They're not conspiracy theorists. They're generally speaking, they're socially liberal.
So there's a natural ally between religious liberals and godless atheists.
You have exactly. Yes. You have all our welcome out there, right? So we have so many things that we share in common, right? Now there's a bit less with conservative religious persons. But there's still just little things that you can find, right? I call them strange connections, right? So for instance, I also work with Muslims. You're mentioning Islam earlier. I also work with Muslims. That's a whole different, I don't want to say can of worms because that sounds bad.
But you talked about a Muslim atheist dialogue.
Yeah, and I've started that. I've started a few of those, and that's different. But there are still those common things, like even just the desire to promote a general sense of justice or love. Everyone has a vision of the future that's brighter and better, I feel. And of course, I'm not working with the extremists or fundamentalists because there's not really much ground there. But even with conservative religious persons, there are some things you can find and just be like, oh, well, we can still treat each other like humans and find ways to live together.
It seems to be that we need to increase and be vocal about that middle position. that possibility of dialogue and working together.
Absolutely.
I want to have the congregation ask some questions too. Here's your chance. We got one live on the hot seat. So I'm going to ask the ushers if they could come and help me with the microphones.
And feel free to ask me anything.
He's game. Go ahead.
Within reason.
Do you have questions? There we go. There's one.
Okay, so if we imagine this world populated by humans and other animals, and then we imagine a world, an Earth, where the most advanced species is cockroaches.
Okay.
So there's lots of other things, but cockroaches are the most intelligent. Why would you think would you think that one world is morally superior to the other, and why would it be morally superior?
Look at the philosopher in the pews. What's going on? Where are the dumb people? You're asking me about modal logic and possible worlds? Wow. And cockroaches? I wouldn't even know where to start there. How would I distinguish one world being morally superior to another?
Yeah, how does an atheist have morals? I think is kind of a sense of.
Well, it's naturalistic, right? Like it's a bottom-up approach to morality. Like morality arises within Homo sapiens through experience and through sentiments, right? It doesn't come up from on high down. It comes from the bottom up. Now, I tend to base my ethics on a notion of well-being, like subjective and objective well-being. And that can include things like health, that can include things like psychological well-being, mental health, physical health. Inflicting harm, to me, is a negative. And I don't feel like I need a ground for that, like something to ground that. Like 2 + 2 = 4 to me doesn't need a ground. It just is the fact that 2 + 2 = 4. In the same way that me right now just clocking you and knocking you out, it's just prima facie wrong, and I don't need another ground for it. I mean, you could that could go on. That moral debate could go on forever, but that's how I would answer it.
As you look at your life, do you see a spectrum, and you can place yourself at different places on that spectrum?
Sure. Yeah. Young, rambunctious, evangelical, out to save the world for Christ, to more militant, angry atheists, to kind of calmer, a little more seasoned and refined version of myself. So yeah, now I don't really expect to go back to any faith. One of my pastor friends, David, is funny. He's like, Kyle, you're such a closeted Christian. You spend so much time in church. And but no, I don't expect to return to any other worldview. But of course, my views change as I get older and different experiences happen.
All right, there we have one.
Welcome. Is that on, Kyle? Thanks for coming up today. My name is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
I'll just speak really open. I'm a pretty progressive but very monotheistic person. It's part of who I am.
Sure.
But one thing you talked about I was interested in was you were a youth pastor, and I have a middle schooler, and it's a great time. I wanted to just ask you how you work with younger people now, and I'm very lucky. I come from a huge group of family and friends from all different beliefs, and I was raised to really honor all of that. How do you work with young people? And I think I'll have some tough questions coming, and I want to just hear how you approach that with young people now.
Yeah, it's a good question. With compassion, for me, I was a crazy teenager, absolutely nuts. I mean, just wild. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was doing. There were these three things called sex, drugs, and rock and roll that, of course, upset, you know. It's a teenager, all right? I mean, that's just a teenage wasteland. You don't know who you are. I mean, no offense to teenagers, but you're all over the place, right? So when I work with children or teenagers now, I work with this sense of like, I've been there. I remember all those different conflicting desires and struggles and who am I and forming my identity and all of this. So I do it with a sense of grace, a sense of compassion. I guess I wouldn't be the strictest parent. I'm not a parent, but I can't imagine myself being really too harsh. I'd probably be a little hypocritical in the sense that I wouldn't allow them to do what I was allowed to do. But yeah, just with a general sense of compassion. I mean, if that's your navigating assumption, I think you're always going to err in the right.
All right. We have just one more question, then we're going to have an opportunity after the service ends to come back and talk some more. Yeah, Judy.
Good, I'm the last one with the mic. A common held belief about atheists is that because you don't believe in a supreme being or anything like that, that you're here while you're here, and when you're done, you're done.
Yeah.
And I want to know if that's accurate or if that also varies.
Yeah. You'll be hard pressed to find an atheist that believes in an afterlife. There are some atheists, for instance, some secular forms of Buddhism that are non-theistic, will still believe in reincarnation. They'll still believe you come back in some form. Most atheists don't. Most atheists believe that death is the cessation of identity. You're gone. There's no you left. You're tree food. And Maya was telling me here, girlfriend, about these, you can get buried beneath a tree.
Like a biourn.
Biourn, where you're buried beneath a tree, so you like become part of that tree, which I thought was really cool. I would hope that my apples would taste really good. But most atheists don't believe in an afterlife, and they believe death is final, like death with a capital D. So I myself believe that too, which does two things, right? It's scary, right? Now I don't know. I'm going to be the first to say I've never died, and I am not 100% sure, positive, apodictically certain that there will be nothing after. And that's scary, right? Death scares me. If death doesn't scare you, I don't know, I think there's something wrong with you, because death should be somewhat scary. But at the same time, it's also exhilarating, right? If this is my moment in the sun, if all I have is this bleep little chance to do something, I rise up out of nothing, I do a beautiful dance, and I fall back into the abyss. And it makes it beautiful, because it's finite. So yeah, it's scary and beautiful. It's a beautiful scary.
Beautiful. The terrible beauty of life. There it is. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.